Ready? Okay, we're gonna start in 5.
Welcome to the In Conversation Black Writers in the UK Book Industry. I'm Nurina Safitri. It's my pleasure to be here. Today we're going to have a panel discussion with award-winning poet, novelist, academic, and musician Anthony Joseph and Irenosen Okoji from the UK. So, without further ado, let's start the session with a reading of a short passage from the writers. I'm going to introduce Irenosen Okoji, and please do the reading for first time. Please, the time is yours, Irenosen.
Thank you for that. I'm really delighted to be here with you guys. I'm going to read from my latest collection, Nadine Branch, which is a collection of fantastical stories about characters on the cusp of change. This particular story, Mangata, an albino man, returns back home to Mozambique following the death of his mother to build water fountains in the local town. So this is an excerpt from Mangata. The man who brought a miracle to the small town in northern Mozambique was both remarkable and ordinary. As an albino, he wasn't an unfamiliar sight, although other things indicated he was different. He walked with a certain comfort in his skin that wasn't of the surroundings, assured, confident. He had a birthmark on his neck, which looked like a stem growing from his movements. His nails were painted black, his hands elegant, the fingers long, tapered. His tongue sported a silver ring at the tip, a pink-pierced entity darting out readily to abandon his mouth. On the afternoon Terry Midas arrived, it was scorching. He stood waiting at the pickup point near the market, a black god painted alabaster, holding his light travel bag. His batik shirt had sweat patches. Tan trousers stuck to his clammy thighs uncomfortably. The dust-covered leather sandals he wore felt heavy, he having walked a few miles in the bush to get to this point. He'd done so with trepidation, fear scattering wildfire into his veins as it spread through his limbs. He knew the stories of albinos being persecuted, hunted for the value of their body parts, kidnapped, killed, and sold. During the walk, in his mind's eye, he'd seen flashes of cutlasses raised up, bones on the necks of men whispering in the voices of ancestors, the cries of medicine men splintered in his ears. He'd seen blood in the sky and the trees shedding pale skin. He'd arrived at the market gratefully spat from the tortuous bush, out of breath. 10 years away and nothing had prepared him for the intensity of being back. The heat, the dusty roads, the shanty houses made quaint by the distance of separation, the slick black bodies rhapsodic in their freedom. He hadn't been primed for the warmth, small bursts of joy, the fear, the feeling of familiarity, the feeling of being foreign, a mouthful of echoes slipping teasingly out of reach. Sweating profusely, he stood, walked to a shaded corner of the shop he decided to wait at, thinking of albinos that had appeared to him through night traffic, hundreds of them, each holding angles of light doubling as rabbit holes. It came to him then, The memory of that night years ago, the thick suffocating heat, sluggish grasshoppers chorusing, mosquitoes hovering around the one stubby shrinking candle in their shack as if drawn to a possible death. Mama Carlos sat snoozing gently by the door to protect him in a ritual that saw her bloodshot eyes close reluctantly, eventually succumbing to the demands of the body. Her large bosom rising steadily up and down, the small picture of Christ pinned on the wall above the green mosquito net, which swooped down, tiny winged fireflies with far too much gumption zigzagging above their heads, and Christ's robe singed from the blue candle flame that thought it could fly, bending willfully in the heat, his eyes temporarily blinded by tiny bloodshot figures taking residence there. Terry on the bed, tossing and turning, the sound of water in the empty petrol can on the floor by his pillow of bunch clothes. Then 3 men kicked down their door. He saw the glint of blades at Mama Carlos's throat, heard rough, urgent orders being issued, Mama Carlos screaming so loudly their response was a backhand slap to her face. Terry shrank back against the wall, powerless, pale and trembling. Necklaces of small bones on the men's necks jangled, their faces partially obscured by handkerchiefs tied over their mouths. The smell of the day's sweat from their bodies, mingled with fear in the room, was potent. They dragged him to the rusted white truck outside, dumped him in the back, then piled in laughing, the truck screeching away, exhaust pipe smoke curling around the edges of an abduction. They sped off. The truck eventually wound its way around the bush. It was at this point Terry leaped out, running for his life. He ran so fast, blindly, an alabaster boy slipped from the world's pocket into the night's cruel playground. He ignored the scratches of wild plants on his legs, the stinging on his arms. The men had left the truck, whistling crudely, clicking their fingers to catch him again. A path snaked through the bush, appearing from nowhere, glimmering, rising, rushing, similar to the noise made in their petrol can at home. He ran along the path. He never remembered how he got all the way back to the village. He'd cried in relief at the people gathered holding kerosene lamps, babbling at them frantically, half out of his mind and skin, and everything being in the wrong place. Their shack uprooted from Mama Carlos's injuries, the girl who'd given him a green banana earlier in the day, balancing a basket of bones instead on her head, clicking her fingers, Christ's photo tearing through the roots of the truck, his face covered with a soiled handkerchief, Mama Carlos screaming into the petrol can, the candle flame growing into a blue-tongued carcass in the bush, and the lines of the night reduced into the shape of a howl beneath tires crunching on stones. Thank you.
That was Irenaissance with her short passage from Nadine Branch, a novel in 2019. Is that right?
Yeah, a collection of short stories published in 2019.
Okay, cool. And next, I'm going to invite Anthony Joseph to read short passage from this book, Kitsch. Please, Anthony.
Hey. Thank you. I'm just going to read a passage that kind of comes in the middle of the first section of the book, which is called London is the Place for Me, which kind of reimagines the arrival of the Empire Windrush in June 1948. Dark figures crowd the prow of the ship, black faces peering from the top deck. Some have footholds in the riggings, some hold their hats and jackets shut against the wind. Silhouettes of their dark masts, and then the buzzing hum of their voices traveling across the water. The ship begins to turn slowly into dock. It asserts its drafts and trim. It rests on its keel, and then the engines die with a groan. Those on the shore cannot fathom the depth of field, likewise as islands are often underestimated on maps by cartographers. So too the ship's true scope overwhelms the eye. The men on the boat can see the crowd gathered on the docks to meet them, and they wave. They put fingers beneath their tongues and whistle. They have seen shipyards and ships arriving before. They know what to do. Their faces are taut and starched by 6 week sea blasts. When they come down the gangways with their sea grips and baggage, their shoes are the only things shining in the dull light. A young man steps onto land. He feels the air with his face, tastes it with his open tongue, the sea smell, the moisture on the tongue. One suitcase or box case or bundle tie up with twine, the soft suit, the pastel-colored seersucker shirt, the trilby, the brogues burnished from kneeling between the vanished pews on some evangelical Sunday morning in the tropics, with the breadfruit branch knocking on the roof of the sermon. But he stands here now on the wooden jetty, upright in England, the land he had imagined for so long. A photographer fixes his image, flash bites his eye. A reporter in a black wool coat, black hat, his red face round and impartial, pate microphone in hand. He pulls his bulk up the gangway onto the deck. There are a group of men there, leaning starboard on the top deck, smoking slow cigarettes, waiting for the jetty to clear so they can come down to England in style. He who sings is the center of their circle, and the reporter wants to see who stands among them with the song. The Calypsonian emerges to face the mic and camera eye. He wears a wide-brimmed trilby, fawn brown, pinched at the crown, a polywool suit in indigo blue with wide lapels and padded shoulders, black tie, crisscross patterned with white near the knot. The trousers are high-waisted and hold 2-inch folds. They fit so loose in the thigh that the sea breeze flaps the pleats. The camera operator sets his tripod on the roof of a car on the jetty below and zooms the image of the Calypsonian down to earth from the deck. What appears to be close in his lens is actually distant, and this is why the film stock cannot capture the fine details of the Calypsonian's face. The rigid bone, the cat eye, the blink. Instead, the image he records is dark and simple. Now, may I ask you your name, Lord Kitchener? Lord Kitchener, now I am told that you are really the king of calypso singers. Is that right? Yes, that's true. Well, now can you sing for us? Right now? Yes. London is the place for me. He mimics the upright wood bass. London, this lovely city. The right shoulder rises, the beat runs down. You can go to France or America, India, Asia, or Australia, but you must come back to London City. Wood bass in the throat, the rolling country Baptist diction. Tap tap of the beat against the railings and his shoulders ducking and clenching, releasing the rhythm the loud way, the drum. 2 verses is all he sings. The wind on the river blows up ghost behind these men. Look how cold tightens their smiles, and in the somber dim dawn, when the Calypsonian finally climbs down the gangway with his beige canvas suitcase, he looks to the sky, always the sky, but cannot find the sun. More smoke, smoke upon smoke upon smoke upon smoke upon smoke upon smoke upon smoke.
Wonderful. There was
Thank you.
Anthony Josephs from his book Hitch in 2018. All right, I re-welcome you to our session today. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're now watching In Conversation, Black Writers in the UK Book Industry. I present you 2 outstanding writers from the UK, Anthony Joseph and also Irinosen Okoji. I also will introduce our 2 wonderful sign interpreters today, Jasmine and also Innova. Okay, so Irinosen Okoji is a Nigerian British writer. She has a long list of achievements. The reason why is 2020 AKO Kane Prize for Fiction for her story Grace Jones. Her short story collection Speak Gaikantular, published by Jacaranda Books, was shortlisted for the H. Hill Short Story Prize, the Charlotte Prize, the Sabaton Awards, and nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award. Her debut novel, Butterfly Fish, in 2014, won a Betty Trust Award and was shortlisted for an Edinburgh International First Book Award. She is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Please welcome Irenosen Okochi with me. You can have a virtual applause. Thank you. And next, our outstanding speaker is Anthony Joseph, who is the award-winning author of 4 poetry collections and 3 novels. He was born in Trinidad and holds a PhD in creative and life writing and lectures in creative writing at the Montfort University, Leicester. In 2019, he was awarded a Jerwood Compton Poetry Fellowship. In 2020, a Polish translation of The African Origins of UFOs was published, followed by a Spanish edition of Kids that you just listened to. As a musician, he has released 7 critically acclaimed albums and in 2020 received a Paul Hamblin Foundation Composers Award. I'm Narina Safitri from Amnesty International Indonesia. I'm so pleased to be joining in this session. And thank you for watching us. We're going to have discussion with Anthony and also Irenosen. So I'm going to talk to Irenosen first. Would you mind to tell us what was the short passage about? I learned that it's actually a little man experience a tragedy, but in interesting language. Can you elaborate more on this short passage?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned when prefacing it, it's about an albino, a successful albino architect who lives in the West but returns back home to Mozambique, where he's experienced some trauma in the past, especially in his childhood, because albino people are unfortunately often persecuted in parts of Africa, and the very simple act of something like going to get water could kill you because you could be kidnapped and killed. So I really wanted to explore this idea of an other within an other. I'm really interested in otherness as a theme, and what that looks like, what that feels like, what those experiences are. And I think it's particularly interesting with characters like that because you have the experience of blackness, but also within that, you're seen slightly differently. And this really was sparked from watching a CNN item about the experiences of albinos in Africa, and it really struck me and stayed with me. So it was something that I wanted to write about. And my character goes back home, after the death of his mother, to sort of build water fountains in his local town. So the story has a kind of, fantastical element as well. But that's the essential kind of premise of it.
How important is the element of otherness in your story? I read some of the reviews from your books that you always bring strong character, and the person in Nadine Branch and part of the short passage that you read to us is also interesting. And you also told us just now that otherness as a theme is the one that interests you. Can you elaborate more on that? How important otherness in your pieces?
Yeah, sure. I mean, lots of themes interest me really, but otherness is one of them, I think, because of having, been born in Nigeria and moved to the UK at a very young age. I was 8 years old when I came to England to go to boarding school in the countryside. And yeah, that was a very strange experience for me. And it was, growing up in Nigeria, where blackness was prevalent, I was surrounded by it. So, and it was like wonderful in all its multitudes as well. But when I came to England, I saw that blackness was kind of coded differently. And being in that environment, I felt other for the first time because people made a point of telling me, and I think I was probably myself and my older brother were the only 2 black kids. So I did very much feel other there. And it was kind of a process of trying to adjust and to be accepting of that feeling and to kind of embrace the sort of beauty of it. And I think otherness is really, really interesting, and it kind of how you adjust, and the combination of otherness and identity, and what that kind of brings up in a person, and how that kind of shifts gradually over the years is really fascinating to explore. So like that's why it's quite a strong theme for me, and because I have that personal connection to it, it doesn't feel like a challenge to write about it. But what is interesting is to write about it in ways that feel new and exciting, and that's what I try to do. So I'm always looking for slightly different angles in terms of telling my stories. So yeah.
That's interesting. I'm moving to Anthony. Can you tell us more about what you read, the short passage from Kitsch?
Yes. So in 1948, in June 1948, a ship called the Empire Windrush arrived in the UK carrying probably about 500, just over 500 passengers from the Caribbean. And it is often seen, it is sort of an iconic moment in British history because it's seen as the beginning of multiculturalism in Britain. And it's become this sort of, this image is sort of repeated every year around Black History Month. We see the image of this ship coming, and it's become this big deal. And the guy, the Calypsonian, the musician that I wrote about, Lord Kitchener, he came on that ship. And there's film of him, there's footage of him, black and white footage of him singing on the ship as he arrives. And he's singing this song, London is the Place for Me. Very pivotal, important moment. And when I was researching it, I kind of figured out there was different ways of looking at the film. The film that we presented, the Pate film, which you could find on YouTube or whatever, when you really deconstruct the film and really look at it, the way it positions these men that are coming is really interesting. So I decided I was going to reimagine it and try to put it in from the perspective or have a closer lens on the characters on the ship, because in the film you don't really get to know these men. They're first of all shot in the far distance, and then the people that they actually speak to on the ship, the people that the reporters speak to, don't seem to have a clue of what they're doing or what's going on. And that to me is typical of the way that the Black folks are portrayed, or have been portrayed, or had been portrayed, I guess, in the media at that time. The sort of exoticism of these men, these men coming. Plus, there's only men that's ever seen, and there were lots of women on the ship. I mean, that's another story. But I wanted to reimagine that scene, and that's what that particular passage is about, is giving voice to these men and showing their humanity,
Okay, so humanity and multiculturalism, that's two interlinked concepts. How do you see your book and your music, perhaps? How is it important, the message of multiculturalism in your pieces?
No, it's not. I mean, I don't think any artist, well, I guess some do, but I definitely don't set out to be, a political writer or to address certain themes or whatever. I'm a channel, and I experience stuff and I put it out in the work, and whatever comes out in the work, the form is what happens, But because I guess I experience things, I'm a political being and I experience things, that has to come out in the work. But there's no intent to, you can't, as a writer, set out to create a particular type of work, or you can't set out to influence how a reader reads your work. You have to create the best work, or the most sort of honest work that's possible. And then the reader interprets it. So there's no, humanity and multiculturalism are things that are in the work because I experience them, not because I insist on them being in the work, if you know what I mean. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it's more personal to you. I think it's your personal story that you want to tell. Is that what you meant?
Not always. I mean, Kitsch wasn't my story. But I think the personal is the universal, and the more you expose yourself as a human being, the hardest thing for me the task of being a writer is to be human. it's the most difficult thing to do, to actually be human and experience, humanity and experience what it means to be human. And if you can connect to people on that real human level, then you're successful as a writer. So that's what I try to do. I just try to be human. And it's very difficult. Yeah.
So writing for you is a way to be a human, right?
I think so. Yeah. It's to explore what it means to be alive. It's to find answers, to create beauty in the world, to create pleasure, to fill a gap that, I think a lot of writers, including myself, we write because there's something missing and we want to fill that gap. There's something missing and we want to fill it. So there's this process of always trying to fill a space, fill a gap that's missing. I think that becomes your role as a writer as you develop and get older, at least.
Okay, I'm moving to Irenasan. I recently watched your YouTube video. In the video, there's an interesting part that you say to the audience. You said, process of writing is elevating oneself to higher consciousness. It's a political act. Can you elaborate more on that for our audience here today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Anthony just touched on it, I guess, in terms of the politics of writing. It's not that you set out necessarily to be political, but you experience certain things as a Black woman, as a Nigerian British woman. That experience is very specific, and it means I'm writing from a particular perspective. And there are trials and tribulations about that experience. And when I write about that, I want to write about it as honestly as possible. I want to be as authentic as possible. But I'm also looking for the beauty in the everyday. And I think that there is something really magical about writing, the writing process. It's a process of investigation for me. So I'm asking certain questions, but I don't know the answers to them. I never face the page knowing the answers, but I do want to ask certain questions, and I do want to interrogate that process of being, a living, breathing human being. And that's what I try to do in the work. But then something incredible happens, I think, when you do that practice regularly. It takes you to a different space. It really does. And then you become a vessel. It's really interesting. Then you become, as Anthony said, this channel, really. And when you reach that space, it's an elevated space, and it's really beautiful. So that's what I meant by those two things.
Okay. So I read some reviews in the internet about Speak Gigantula, Iren. The reviewers say that your pieces actually really have strong character. They name some characters, and it also relate with imaginations and how your Black history influence your pieces in a way that you finally created strong character in each of your pieces.
Yeah, sure. I mean, talking about my history particularly, my family is from Benin in Nigeria, and Benin, the Kingdom of Benin, is something that is well recognized as a really special place and time, and very forward thinking in terms of what people were doing and the art and the culture and the palace. So I really wanted to claim that history. In the UK, we're taught a lot of Black history is around slavery. And yes, slavery happened, but so much else happens in Black history. So there was that frustration there for me. There's so much hidden Black history that isn't really explored. And, the Benin Kingdom was just fantastic. So I remember hearing stories from my dad about it, and it just was something that stayed with me. So as part of my debut novel, I reimagined the Benin Kingdom as part of that book. And, the joy for me was really reclaiming that history. And I hadn't seen Benin written about much in fiction. I'd seen it written, there's lots on it, non-fiction, but in fiction that really hadn't been done much. And this was an opportunity for me to own that legacy. And it was really exciting to be able to incorporate it into the book. So yeah, I think if you can tap into rich histories and find a way to kind of incorporate them and explore them, it just adds another layer to the work. You know, it just adds like multiple hidden depths to the work. So that was why like writing that novel felt particularly fulfilling for me. It was just like a joy to be able to write about that history.
All right. Okay. We now have question from the audience. It is for Anthony. Anthony, what were the processes or challenges in writing a poetry from the perspective of other people, in this case, ancestors?
I mean, for Kitsch, that's what I could speak to. I mean, Kitchen, you know, I grew up listening to Kitchener's music, and he was really a part of the consciousness of what it meant to be a Caribbean person and a Trinidadian in particular. But there was nothing written about him. So he died in 2000 after having a career which lasted like 60 years. And there was no book. I couldn't go to a library and find a book about him. So I decided, you know, this process of something missing was there. So I decided I was going to fill that gap by writing this thing. So in terms of how you go about doing that, how I chose to go about doing it was to gather as much information about him as possible, like a biographer would do, but also to speak to people, to interview people that actually knew him or that were influenced by him, you know, people that grew up in the same neighborhood that he grew up in, people that remember him. Because he died in 2000, so there were still people alive that knew him. So I did quite a few years of that, researching and speaking to people, speaking and just trying to, in the end, tell the story through their voices rather than mine. I mean, as the author, it is inevitably going to be my sort of aesthetic voice. But I wanted to capture the community. And that was a decision that I made because so far, so many biographies that we read are about great men or great women that do great things. And this light is shown upon them as we move through their story. I wanted to do it in a different way. I wanted to show the people that were holding up the light. I wanted to show the people that were behind Kitchener, who created him, who created his mythology. So that's how I approached it. Rather than, you know, having Kitchener speak for himself and recreate his own myth, I wanted other people, the community, because, you know, Caribbean literature has been a history of we against them, and we and them, rather than individuals. It's not so much about the individual, it's about a community and how the community overcomes their various tribulations. In the West, in Europe and in America, the focus tends to be on individuals, the individual, you know. And in the Caribbean, for a Caribbean writer growing up or a Caribbean person growing up in the 20s and the 30s, it really wasn't about you. It was about your community. It was about who you were among other people. So that was what I tried to do with Kitsch, to tell the story from the point of view of others, people that knew him.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. So my next question is actually for both of you. Would you mind to share good reference or story of how a UK arts or literature sector has come to be more diverse in the recent days or for the past decades? Maybe Anthony, you can start first.
Can you repeat that question? Let me just try to.
Yes.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, would you mind to share good reference or stories of how UK arts or literature sector has come to be more diverse over the years or in the past, for the past decade?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. For me, it started in the mid-90s. For me, this sort of new sort of generation of diversity and diversity in literature started in the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, I was working in bookshops. I was working, like, you know, as a bookseller, and I could see how things change. I used to run a Black writing department, and suddenly it became a thing. There became this thing called a Black writing department, and it was fueled by people like Zadie Smith, you know, who suddenly came up. You know, suddenly one or two writers began to be published by mainstream presses, and with this sort of whole, you know, there was New Labour coming into power at the time. There was the whole Britpop thing, and there was this sort of opening out of the lens of British culture. Around that time, I think the book, the Phillips brothers' book on the Windrush, came out. So there was this whole new interest in Caribbean writing, Black British writing, and that's what I see as the start. And since then, you know, a lot of it, to be honest, is fueled by economics. A lot of it is simply a market. You know, publishers realizing not only that there are writers of color writing out there and doing good work, but that we could make money from it. We could sell it. You know, so that might be cynical, but it's important because, you know, it's writing as a sort of full-time or professional writer, that's important. Economics is important. So I think that's where it started for me. Prior to that, there were very few, very few Black writers published in the UK. When I published my first novel in 92, oh gosh, I even forgot, 2005, it was a science fiction novel. That was unheard of. There was nothing like a Black British science fiction book out there, you know. And then this next year, the year after that, it suddenly blossomed. So, yeah, mid-90s.
Okay. Irinos, and how do you think about that? The same question. Sorry, would you want to unmute?
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's really interesting. I was saying, I remember the 90s actually, and that sort of flurry of Black British writers. And I remember actually going to bookshops and seeing the Black section and being excited that there was a section, you know, for Black writing. And I would just always go and pick up books there and just like devour them. And I think I remember like the imprint, the Express was around at the time as well. And that was something that was quite a big deal because it was perceived as quite a, you know, a radical press. So things were happening. And I remember Anthony's book in 2005, actually. I remember that. And I remember being excited about that. And, you know, I think there was a bit of a lag, actually, after that 90s period, that golden period, there was, because suddenly, you know, there weren't really that many Black writers around. So there was like a kind of gap period. And also I wondered what happened to some of the Black writers that were published. You know, what happened? Why weren't they supported? Why didn't we see them later on? So for me, it's not just getting published. Getting published is hard enough. It's like sustaining a career as a Black writer. When you look at the ones that have now, you know, Anthony, people like, you know, Bernardine Evaristo, Alex Wheatle, etc., and how they've done it, and you have conversations with them. It's not been easy, you know. So that is something that fascinates me. Not just that we're publishing Black writers, but like how do we make sure that they're supported so they can have longevity, you know, and have careers, not just be kind of like this golden period. But certainly, I think it's on the agenda. You know, diversity is on the agenda, and it's on the agenda of publishers. So, you know, in the last 2-3 years, quite a few Black writers have been picked up and, you know, published in the UK. So, you know, things are hopefully, I think, changing. You know, we just hope that that's going to be for the long term. My publisher, Charmaine Lovegrove, who runs dialogue books at Little Browns, as part of Hachette, is like a real force of nature, you know, Black woman of Jamaican origin, doing great things in the industry. And of course, you know, I have to mention Margaret Busby before her, who also did like wonderful things and was the first Black British woman publisher as well. So yeah, there is a kind of history there, but I think like there needs to be more. So like Anthony said, like suddenly they're recognizing the value of Black stories, and not just the value, but that they appeal to like different audiences. You know, before, the way that you would be stopped is that they would say, well, we don't know how we're going to market these books. That was usually like, you know, the excuse for not publishing Black writing, even if it was excellent. It was like, oh, there's no, like, who are we gonna market these books to? Now they can see that audiences actually are hungry for these stories. So yeah.
Okay. More questions coming up from Rebecca Hart for both of you. Do you think the UK book sector is headed in the right direction towards more inclusive publishing, or is it still too tokenistic? Where does more work need to be done? Maybe Anthony, you can answer first.
I think more work needs to be done. I think we are at the beginning. I think we still have a long way to go. I mean, we're talking about the sort of British literature as an entity has been, the canon has been established for centuries. We're talking a canon that's been established over centuries. So for black writing or black writers to gain a foothold in that, it's not going to take 20 years. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while before we actually become part of the canon. I mean, if we're in 2020 and still talking about, if we're still, I mean, I work for a university and we're having meetings now about how to decolonize your syllabus. If we're doing that in 2020, that means that we have a long way to go. If I'm still introducing people to, to writers from the Caribbean or writers, black writers from France, say, or black writers from, Jamaica, if I'm having to do that in 2020, it means that we have a lot of work to do still. I mean, of course, it's not every writer ends up being successful. Not every black writer is going to be canonized. Of course, that's not what we're looking for. But we're looking for. I mean, I hope that there comes a time when there's no sort of barriers between, or there's no sort of the categories kind of drop a little bit, so that we are all kind of on the same playing field, and we're not put in a section of a bookshop, a black writer's bookshop, black writing section in a bookshop, and then a few years after that, forgotten. I mean, this whole thing about sustaining careers is important. Let's see what happens in 10 years. Let's see who's there. Let's see if we're publishing. Let's see if black writers are still a force. If we get there in 10, 20 years, then we're on the path. But there's a lot of work to be done still, I think.
Do you copy that, Irene Olsen, or you have another thought of that?
No, sure. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I'm just thinking about the mention of the word tokenistic, and I really think that it has to be a priority. So if it appears tokenistic, you're talking about years of absence, really, and there has to be some addressing of that. And if it's tokenistic, so be it, because for many years, a long time, like there just hasn't been that platform for black writers and writers of color as well. So now, like, it's really on the agenda. Now they really want to make sure that those voices get out there, and I hope that it's sustainable, that it's not just for now, in this very sort of political moment where we have these movements, Black Lives Matter, and everything that's happened, and of course people are responding to that. It sparked the conversation, which is good, but it's just interesting that it took that happening for people to suddenly really want to pay attention. It's like for people to suddenly really see your humanity, people had to die, and that's quite frustrating, really, when you think about where that comes from. But we do have to learn from it, and if people are suddenly realizing that these stories have value, and these voices need to have platforms, then that's really important. I'm just thinking about Anthony talking about syllabuses and curriculums. That is so huge. I think, like, honestly, it's so critical that we do decolonize them, and the work is there. Like, even if they're saying, oh, there aren't that many Black British voices, there are voices from the Caribbean, there are voices from Africa, certainly there are voices from South America, there are some Black British voices. There's just absolutely no excuse, I think, to not have syllabuses that are inclusive and enriching. I, as a Black woman, when I think about my culture as a reader, because I'm not just a writer, I'm a reader, when I think about that culture that I've cultivated, it's really inclusive. And I've been like that since I was a kid. So if I can do that, I don't understand, why other people can't, why people within the industry find it really difficult to not value other perspectives. But now, like, that kind of reckoning is happening. And, you know, like Anthony said, you know, let's hopefully see where that takes us down the line, and, you know, that we actually really become part of the culture and part of the infrastructures, because you need us within the infrastructures as well. You know, you need more like Black lecturers and more Black academics, and you need more Black editors and more Black publishers, not just one or two, because it's not really ever going to change. You know, you have to really shake the table, not just invite one or two people. You have to rattle the table, and I think there is that reluctance. It's kind of like, oh, such and such is invited to the table, but other people aren't. Well, that's not really shaking it. So I think it has to change on multiple levels.
So do you think it's more Black writers, more Black editors, more Black publishers? Are they very important to challenge the narration of racism these days?
I think it's important, because if you look at, you know, what the editors have looked like and what people in those positions have looked like, you know, obviously the books that get published are a reflection of that, and you can't change that unless you have Black editors and Black publishers. It's just a fact, you know. It's just a fact. So what are they doing to foster the next generation of Black editors and like what's being done? I remember maybe like one or two development schemes that happened and then just kind of petered off. Like, why did they peter off? Why was it not seen as important to continue to like develop them, to have a space for that to happen? So I think like now more than ever, we're seeing like things like that pop up. And again, those things need to be sustained. Like, you know, these sort of spaces or labs or, I don't know, mentoring or shadowing where, you know, people have a way into the industry. I think a lot of Black people and maybe people of color didn't really think about publishing as a space for them to work, because, you know, how do you get in? You know, you've got to be able to like afford to do it, you know, and often the people that are, you know, the interns are people from middle class backgrounds or upper class backgrounds who have connections in the industry. Let's not, you know, mess around about that. That is a real thing, you know, and if you're interested in it and you don't have a way of getting in, you know, you suddenly just think, oh, maybe it's not for me. So I think that really needs to change, and that's the responsibility of people within those publishing houses to do something about that, to be really proactive about it. You know, if you are the publishing director of X publishing house, how are you addressing that? And if you're not addressing it, why aren't you addressing it? Why isn't it a priority? Because it needs to be. You know, so I think there's lots of you know, things around infrastructure that also like needs to change as well.
All right, cool. I'm moving to Anthony. We have another question from Evelyn. If you had to choose, do you prefer your books be among other books as equal, or have a special section in the bookstores? Second question, maybe first question first, Anthony.
No, I prefer to be among other writers, because, you know, if we're talking about writing, the task of a writer being a human, then, you know, for me, I need to be read alongside anyone else. I need to be read alongside Keats. I need to be read alongside anybody, you know. So I don't particularly like the idea of being in a separate section, unless there is a specific reason for that, and unless there's a way that I might sell a few more books. If that is the case, as a one-off, that's fine. You know, for instance, in a festival situation, you know, that's fine. But in generally, no. In generally, I think it's important to be among other books. I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't be. You know, when I used to run the Black writing section at a bookshop in London, one of the things I used to do was, you know, I had my so-called Black section, which I had all the books that I had stocked, and I would import books from the US, you know, really interesting stuff. But I would also put a lot of those books within the other fiction section. So you could go to the other fiction section and find the books there as well. You could find Walcott in the poetry section. There was no Black poetry section. You could find Walcott in there. You could find Selvon in fiction. So I made sure that there was a cross-filtering thing going on. That is important to me. I think, you know, when I was growing up, for instance, I was reading white writers as well as black writers. There was no sort of differentiation for me. And, you know, I was reading across the board. So I think I would like to be read in the same way, you know. Yeah, I think so. I don't like the idea of being separated like that.
Okay, second question, and Irenosen, you can answer it too. Regarding bringing your own voice, do you have encouraging words to bring the voices out for those who have not yet have it? Yeah.
Mute. Encouraging words for emerging writers. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, encouraging word to bring the voices out for those who haven't yet to have it. For someone who, you know, haven't have the courage to voice out, to speak up.
Yeah, no, I think work on the craft really. Just like that love and interest. Keep doing it. Like find ways to sustain it and find ways to be excited about it. And that has its own kind of special momentum, and everybody does it in a slightly different way, you know. And if you are kind of doing that and then finding ways to connect with people and other writers, what happens is, you know, Anthony talked about community earlier on, and that I think is really important, even if it's a small community that, you know, you can foster. It's so helpful. Poets in the UK are very, very good at doing that. I used to work in the poetry sector, and poets are brilliant at supporting each other, you know, at events, and, you know, having groups and, you know, sessions, and just like really connecting. I think it's so helpful and so important, because, you know, what you do is you get yourself permission consistently, you know, because you're sharing work, other people are feeding back on it, and, you know, you don't necessarily fear that it's not a possibility to get work out there, because bit by bit, you know, you're doing open mic nights, you're doing literature evenings, you're finding ways to connect to audiences, and then while doing that, your confidence is growing. That's what happens. Like the more you do it, you know, the more you access different platforms and share that work, that craft that you're kind of quietly working on. Something happens. You know, you might share a piece of work at an event and meet an editor who's turned up just out of curiosity, because they're like, oh, this really kind of grassroots event is interesting, and I want to hear some new voices. And you might just be lucky enough to be there on that day. And that happens. That kind of stuff happens all the time, you know. So I think it's that. I think it's having that passion. I think it's finding ways to foster it. You know, if you can get yourself a mentor, even better. I certainly got myself a mentor years ago as part of a development program with a literature development agency called Spread the Words. And, you know, if there are equivalents of that, then I think it's really helpful as a way of getting people to connect and debunk this idea of publishing being really, really difficult. It is, but if you can find, you know, those kind of spaces and those kind of organizations to sort of help connect you and, you know, provide like programs and workshops and events where you meet other writers, then suddenly it feels like there's that kind of access is there. So I think it's about doing the work, but also finding ways to get yourself out there. You can't just do the work and never want to show it to anybody. I mean, I've come across writers who were like that, who, you know, because writers can be very shy sometimes. Some writers are very confident, and some writers can be very shy. And, you know, one or two of those writers I came across, it was like doing the work, but being scared to kind of put the work out there for fear of rejection. But we all feel like that never goes away. Even when you're published, you know, people still reject you, people still say no to stuff. What has to change is like your sort of sense of confidence as a writer and in your voice, and just understanding that that's just part of the process. You know, so yeah, I mean, I would really like encourage people to kind of remain excited. I think that's the key thing. Remain excited and find ways to, you know, to keep producing work, whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's like a collection, or a collection of poetry, a collection of stories, a novel. And there are platforms out there on the internet now as well. So you may not want to do it via a traditional publisher. You may want to do it through a smaller publisher. And they're publishing like really radical stuff, and have been for a while, and getting those voices out there. So yeah, there's lots of stuff available. So I would definitely encourage people to to keep like pursuing it if that's their area of interest.
Right, because we always have a constant challenge in the future, right?
Right.
Okay, moving to Anthony, how do you think? Or what are your encouraging words for those who are still hesitant to speak up?
I don't think I can add anything to that. I think it was pretty firmly covered. I think as someone that works in academia and sees a lot of students at the beginning of their careers who are just sort of starting out and learning, I think one of the things I try to tell students is to be disciplined about what you do. That writing, literature is one of those things. Writing is a really unique art form in the sense that we use the tools that a writer uses are the tools that everybody uses. Language, we all use language, we all use words. It's different from being a musician. I mean, to be a musician, you have to have a particular musical skill, or you have to learn to play an instrument or understand how to read music. A painter has to learn how to use paint. And these are specific things that you have to learn, otherwise you can't do it. But for writing, everyone speaks and everyone has a voice and everyone can write. Well, most people can. So a lot of the times people forget that you actually have to hone your craft. This idea of craft is important, learning the craft. So I encourage students to be disciplined and to set themselves targets of, write every day. Write for 10, 15 minutes every day. Write in the morning, write at night. Keep writing until, you fall in love with what you do. Until you get to a point where you are uncomfortable if a day passes and you don't write. When you get to that point, you're on your way. So I think the idea of falling in love with your craft and really having a passion and continuing that passion is really important. And the only way you get to that passion is by constant work, and you keep writing until you fall in love with what you do. And it's like a relationship. You fall in love with literature and with writing, and you start to read voraciously. You read and read and read and write, and then you find yourself unable to get out of it. And that's a good point. That's a good stage. So that's what I encourage people to do. Be disciplined, like an athlete. A long distance runner doesn't get up the morning of the race and think, oh, let me do some stretching. Let me try to run this race. That doesn't happen. They train for a year before the marathon comes. So you've got to be disciplined and do the work.
And for you, I have asked this question to Eden Osen, but I need to ask to you as well. So for you, more Black writers, more Black editors, more Black publishers, that will be important to challenge the discouragement for diversity these days?
Absolutely. For too long, I think it still persists. I mean, having a Black agent, we share an agent, me and Irona Hessen. Sorry. We share a Black agent. And, I remember when I met her for the first time, I was like, wow, this is, it's incredible. I have to work with you, because there were so few. And I think that's still the case, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the case. I think if we are talking about changing a system or changing the way Black writing is perceived, we need to go to the sources of power within that industry. Who holds the power? The editors, the agents, people that run marketing departments. These are the things that we need to change. Academics, people who are teaching. When I did my PhD, I was the only Black student in that year. That needs to change. I can't be the only Black literature lecturer in a university. There has to be a few of us. And then we can begin to see things. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take, as I said, we're at the beginning, and it's going to take a long time to get to a point where we are truly there.
All right, thank
If
you.
we ever get there.
We're heading to there. Time is up, Anthony and Irenosen. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for watching us today. I have one important message that I've got from our respectful writers today. More works need to be done to head in the right direction towards more inclusive literature and publishing. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Innova. Thank you for watching us, for watching the In Conversation Black Waters in the UK book industry. I'm Nurina Safici signing off. Thank you all and stay safe. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mengawali hari dengan informasi terkini, menjadi sumber referensi dan inspirasi di setiap aktivitas. Melalui news video portal, segala informasi dapat disajikan cepat, akurat, dan lengkap. Dengan kekuatan teknologi digital, Midcom.id hadir dengan berita pilihan yang dikemas secara menarik. Midcom.id, digitally inspire people.
Sudah 15 menit, masih kejebak macet.
Tenang, daripada emosi, 15 menit Anda jadi lebih berharga kalau bersama saya.
15 Minutes, setiap Rabu, jam 6 sore lewat 45 menit. Mediaindonesia.com hadir dengan opini cerdas dan narasumber kredibel, mudah diakses, informasi berkualitas ada di genggaman Anda. Klik di browser Anda, www.mediaindonesia.com. Dan temukan pandangan berbeda, karena fakta bisa sama, sudut pandang boleh beda. Mediaindonesia.com, views and news.
Dalam setiap denyut kota, saya selalu menjadi saksinya.
Disiarkan lebih dari 20 televisi jaringan Jawa Pos Group. Jawa Pos TV, paling Indonesia.
Wajahku berminyak. Padahal udah pakai make up. Touch up sekejap.
Purbasari Oil Control Matte Powder dengan oil control, whitening, dan UV filter.
Wajah berminyak, gak lagi.
Purbasari Oil Control Matte Powder.